I've just got one more, if I may. I always ask this at the end of my podcast interviews because I'm a huge reader. What do you have any book recommendations for our listener?
Do you know, it always scares me when people ask me this question because I'm not as prolific reader as some people are. I'm always very jealous of people who can just consume books. I'm a phenomenally slow reader. However, I don't mind too much, only because I tend to really process stuff in books. So if I do read a book, even if it takes me 6 months to read it, I process it very, very deeply. So I always make sure that whatever book I'm reading, I know it's a good book. It has to have been recommended at least 7 times before I'll read it, because I don't want to spend my time and processing power processing something which, you know, I could be processing another book that's much better. So I'm afraid my bookshelf is limited, but I do have a very close relationship with the books that I have read. I've noticed that the books that have made the most profound difference to me are quite niche books. So they're books that, so an example of that, in fact, I've literally got it here, and I know people
the fact
can't
that's
see
right there.
this. Yeah, but it's called One Touch at a Time, and this is purely on the psychology of fencing, and it's a very thick book. It's written by
Heavily dog-eared, I see.
Yeah. Oh, it's so that's the other thing with my books. I scribble all over them. I do not keep them precious at all, because why do we read a book if it's not to gain insights or knowledge? And sometimes, you know, if we're scared about underlining something that really rings true to us, we miss the opportunity of using that or coming back to it. So yeah, they're very dog-eared, my books. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to everyone because it's called One Touch at a Time. But for me, it demonstrated that the stuff that I learned about fencing in this book have applied to every other sport, including rowing, because there's so much great stuff in here about visualization, developing intuition, thinking like a champion, stuff like that. So this guy just happened to be a doctor in psychology, and he coached the Hungarian fencing team. So that was just his bag. But it's amazing how much we can learn from other sports as well. Things that if you're really into this, that are quite heavy, but heavy in a good way. I mean, you know, you'll really understand a lot more about the psychology of performance. Thinking Fast and Slow is quite a popular one. It is quite heavy reading. So on the cognitive side of performance, I think it's very good. For me, I've taken a lot from that with regards to developing people's intuition. So helping people think without thinking. When they get to competition, they don't want to be overthinking. But in order to get to that point, we have to have trained their intuition so that their unconscious processes are ones that help them at the very highest level, rather than ones that hinder them. So the whole idea of thinking fast and slow plays to that, because, you know, we have slow thinking, which is really processing things and questioning ourselves. And is that the right thing? Just because I've always done that, is that the right way of doing it? And then that leads into fast thinking, which is we rewire our unconscious brain so that now we're doing it without even thinking. You know, it's a classic from the 70s, but 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I just think it's just one of the most profoundly important books. It's not new. It's not shiny in that regard. But oh my word, we can all learn so much from that. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think that's Stephen Covey.
Yep.
More mainstream stuff about the stuff that we've been talking about. Elite Minds. That's by Stan Beecham, I think. So Elite Minds is a really, really good book. And if you want to know a bit about the dark side of elite athletes, and sometimes how they can almost, sometimes how at the top level of sports, those who are most successful can be quite imbalanced, let's say. And actually, they have a psychology that we wouldn't necessarily encourage in young kids, but that can teach us quite a lot, I suppose, about the darker side almost of sports, and that's called winning at all costs. And then a bit of light reading. I'd say The Art of Thinking Clearly is brilliant. It's basically, so it's before bedtime reading because it's about 100 different like 2-page chapters. And each chapter is a way in which we think incorrectly about things. So it teaches us to think better about what we're trying to do. So it covers, over 100 different cognitive biases that we've had. And it's really fun because you'll read it and you'll think, oh yeah, I actually do that. I do that all the time. And then another bit of light reading, which I just absolutely love, is What Sport Tells Us About Life, which is Ed Smith, the cricketer. He's a very clever guy. I think he was a journalist or is a journalist. But What Sport Tells Us About Life is just fantastic, and it will really enlighten you as to the sort of behind the scenes of people like David Beckham and what his practices can teach us about how to live our life better. So yeah, those are just a few.